as the Scottish Rite rituals become more and more theatrical at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, and as they start to integrate more and more theatrical technology, including lighting and including backdrops and so forth, the Scottish Rite spaces go from being lodge rooms to being theaters, and it's a gradual transformation where originally the Scottish Rite ritual spaces were just oversized lodge rooms, where by the time they're building the Detroit Masonic Temple, the Scottish Rite Theater is literally a theater. And instead of, and you now have one person that's a stand-in that's going through the ritual, but most of the people who are having the degrees conferred upon them are sitting in the seats and going through the ritual by proxy, by watching the theatrical presentation, right? And so, you know, what this does for the Scottish Rite is it allows them to initiate hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals at a time, which means that they can, it's a mass production of fraternal membership, which allows the Scottish Rite to have their coffers expand exponentially, right? Because instead of, you know, having to go through 3 rituals, you know, one at a time for each individual, you can do all 32 degrees over a weekend and have 600 guys go through it at the same time, and they all pay you your initiation fee, they all pay you membership dues, and that again puts money into the pockets of the organization, which allows them to build the spectacular Scottish Rite cathedrals that they built at the beginning of the 20th century.
So you mentioned the Scottish Rite, and we've discussed a lot about Craft Lodge or Blue Lodge. And in your book, you talk about masculine archetypes, and you mentioned 4 in particular that relate to kind of the 4 most well-known Masonic orders: Blue Lodge or the Craft Lodge, York Rite, Scottish Rite, and the Shrine. Could you talk a bit about those? You know, what are those archetypes, and how do they associate with the Masonic orders?
Right. So the other piece of this, of course, is that many people in the present kind of think of the structure of Freemasonry, these different orders that you're talking about, as they don't think of them historically and as having been evolved historically, but there actually is kind of a historic time period, a historic frame for when these organizations reach their culmination, right? So the first one is the Blue Lodge, right, which is of course the oldest, and you know, most of Masonic history literature is about when exactly did the Blue Lodge, as we understand it, come to exist, right? And people have answers all the way from 1590 or 1340 all the way up to 1713, right? And that doesn't, you know, for our purposes, that doesn't matter. By 1860, the Blue Lodge was pretty solidified, right? But then the Knights Templar really takes its modern form in North America after the Civil War, right? And that's that is linked to men wanting to perform military drilling and to do synchronized marching and to have a kind of masculine military identity, which I think is in many ways is tied to the American Civil War. And I think it could also be a reason why I don't think that the Knights Templar were ever as popular in Canada as they were in the United States. And so again, in this period after the Civil War, suddenly there is a demand for militaristic masculine performance. And the Knights Templar fill that in, and suddenly everybody's wearing uniforms that are the same. They're holding, they're marching with swords. that they never think that they're actually ever going to use to kill anybody, you know, but it, and again, because the Knights Templar have this idea of that they are successors to the medieval Knights Templar, just like the Blue Lodge is the successor to the biblical builders of Solomon's Temple. The Knights Templar are a religious group, right? So that they are a masculine representation of what Christianity should be like, right? And that expands, and suddenly the Masonic temples that are being built need to have facilities that fit this new order that is fulfilling a masculine desire in North American society at that time. So you start to get buildings that have what they call armories, which are places for men to store their uniforms and to store their swords, and in some ways become you know, locker rooms before the YMCA has really defined what a locker room should look like. They are literally locker rooms, places to hold your equipment. And then they also start to have banquet halls that the Knights Templar can use as drilling spaces. So frequently when you see a Masonic temple with an extraordinarily large banquet hall, it's not just because they wanted to sit down and break bread together. It's that that space actually also served as a kind of gymnasium where they could practice their martial drilling. So then we've already slightly talked about the Scottish Rite, which expands really starting in the 1890s and going up to the 1930s as they start to use theatrical technology to perform their degrees. And the Scottish Rite is able to tap into the Western esoteric tradition to be teaching people hidden knowledge, whether it's Rosicrucianism or whether it's numerology, or there's all sorts of different esoteric traditions that are fed into the Scottish Rite through kind of the French esoteric revival of the 19th century. And so suddenly men are able to tap into being wise men or magi's or religious leaders through the Scottish Rite, through knowing this system of occult knowledge, or having keys to the system of occult knowledge that the Scottish Rite is supposedly teaching. And it's interesting that this is going on at the same time that in North America, Protestantism is becoming more and more feminized, and the authority figures in the Protestant churches in North America tend to kind of have a more feminine identity through the gender divisions. So with the Scottish Rite taking off when it does, there's lots of different pieces that come together. There's this, again, esoteric occult revival that's going on in Europe at the time, as well as new theatrical technology, as well as reacting to transformations in American religious identity, right? And then the fourth one is the shrine, right? And the shrine, the ancient Arabic order of the nobles of the mystic shrine, is the last of these to develop. Its earliest roots are in New York City right after the Civil War, but it doesn't really take off until 1900. And I think my argument is that the shrine is the final step of Freemasonry adapting itself to 20th century capitalism, where it's kind of like the famous Dale Carnegie book that's about how to win friends and influence people, and which puts an emphasis on personality and being a good fellow and fitting into society and having a sense of humor and being able to get along, as opposed to the earlier fraternal organizations that are all about righteousness and character and uprightness, right? Where you know, the Freemasonry makes a big deal out of the plumb bob and the square, right, which are teaching, you know, rectitude and right living. You don't have the equivalent in the shrine. The shrine is about being a good fellow and crossing the, having a good humor about crossing the burning sands and allowing people to poke fun at you and to live in a fantasy world. The shrine is about a fantasy world of the Middle East that's outside of capitalism, where you don't have to go to work every day, where you can pretend to live in a harem with dancing girls, and again, it's a very 19th century ethnocentric vision of Islam, right? That Islam does not belong to the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? And of course, the most damning piece of it, the piece that shows that the people that were founding the shrine didn't really understand Islam at all, is what a prominent place drinking has in the shrine, when in Islam people are not supposed to be drinking. So that fourth identity I end up calling the jester or the fool, right? And then in the 1960s, when it becomes kind of offensive to people to continue to pretend to be Arabs, right? As we get a larger Arab population in North America, and it becomes more and more difficult to pretend to be Arabs as Shriners. That's why the shrine then moves over to frequently having clowns, right? Because clowns are, a cultural figure that again exists outside of capitalism, exists outside of the workaday world, but is not ethnically offensive to other people, right? So the shrine still has people driving around in small clown cars and pretending to be clowns, because it serves the same function without having the ethnic slur involved in it that they had at the end of the 19th century.